Yes, and now, of course, I am very pleased to exactly 1 year today, after you handed over the baton to me. Please join me up here. After you handed over the baton to me here as having led the Smith School over the 5 years and stopping 1 year ago, handing over to me. It was 5 years with 300% growth. I'm telling you, just think what I took over here. I'm still sort of trying to navigate this wonderful gem that you have trusted me to take on for the past year. And I'm very pleased to let everyone see that he has actually returned after 1 year of sabbatical. He still looks great, and he has also promised to help us take the Smith School into the next journey here. So thank you very much, Cameron, for being here with us today and leading our Climate Innovators showcase. Please.
Great, thank you. So we're running, I'm glad I still look okay. I kind of hoped I might look a bit better after your help. But anyway, yes, so this is thank you. It's the Climate Innovators Showcase. We are standing between you and lunch, but actually this is connected to lunch. So this is kind of an intellectual amuse-bouche or something, cerveau, I suppose. So we have 4 fantastic, not really panelists, because they're going to give you a brief pitch of the businesses that they are starting up. And there's no Q&A. There's nothing really for me to moderate, actually. But what's going to happen is after their pitch, there'll be sets of tables at lunch, and you can go and quiz them if you found their pitches interesting. So please, Professor Jacquie McGlade, the Chief Scientist and Co-Founder of Downforce, do take a seat. Reuben Walker, the Co-Founder and Chief Executive of African Clean Energy. Anastasia Volkova, do join us, CEO and Co-Founder of Regrow Ag. And finally, Cécile Girardin, the Nature-Based Insights Director. So, as I say, all 4 of these innovators are building early-stage businesses. And I think hopefully they're going to find that the wind's in their sails. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke to 250 venture capitalists, and there was a head of steam over their willingness to put capital behind players like you. And as venture capitalists, in my experience, are somewhat like sheep. I think you might have to beware the stampede of them heading in your direction. So each of you have 5 minutes to speak. I'm going to kind of wave at you at 4, and we'll move swiftly through. And no Q&A, as I say, but then you can quiz them over lunch. So we will start with Ruben. Ruben, as you get up to give your talk, I'll just say a little bit more about you. CEO of African Clean Energy. This is a firm, as you'll hear, does sustainable thermal power for cooking and heating. And there's been a lot of kind of nudge, nudge, wink, wink about another university on stage. Ruben's got no connection to Cambridge, but he comes from the other place in Australia. I went to Melbourne University, and he's at Monash. And I'm delighted to have a Monash grad with us. Ruben, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. A great honor to be here with you today. Away from the energy transition here, there are around 3 billion people in the world who actually do not have full household energy access at all. And it's actually quite important to maybe drill down a little bit on what that means, because household energy around the world at the sort of, let's call it the entry level, is quite homogeneous. People generally need lighting. Most people have a mobile phone, if not a smartphone. Many people will have some small electronics like a radio. And then everybody cooks, and if it gets cold, people heat. And there's a huge differential between those energy consumptions. So LED lighting is a couple of watts, mobile phone charging is a couple of watts, same for a radio. Cooking is a couple of thousand watts. And it makes the solution a little bit more complex than you might think. And the consequence of this is that people tend to cook with really inefficient usage of wood and charcoal, which has a number of really, really negative consequences, not least on the climate, but also very much on health. Imagine, lighting a campfire in your own living room every evening, breathing in the smoke. It has all kinds of really negative health impacts. Also, obviously, has major consequences for deforestation. There's a lot of drudgery involved. There are poverty implications. Interestingly, it's actually the electricity consumption or the lack of having electricity things like lighting and phone charging, that cause a lot of cash out for poor people. So if you do not have electricity, you tend to buy candles, you might use kerosene for lighting, you might take your phone to a local shop and pay 75 cents to get it charged, even though that's what we pay a year to charge an iPhone. And of course, there's enormous consequences that result from inefficient use of wood and charcoal, but those often are not cash related because people just spend a lot of time collecting them. If they're more urbanized, it might be cash related because they're buying charcoal. Now, my company, African Clean Energy, our solution to this is a hybrid system. So it's essentially a biomass combustion chamber that has a ventilator sitting underneath it. That's powered with a battery, which is charged with a solar panel. And because you've got the combination of the solar panel and battery, you can also actually power the electricity need. So this is just a one portable system, but it addresses the entire energy need. Interestingly, it also has a microprocessor that sits on the motherboard, the electronics inside, which logs the usage data. So we can see exactly how much is that unit being used, how much is that being used, how much is that being used. There's a couple of really interesting implications of that. First of all, when it comes to quantifying impact, and the most, let's call it monetizable impact is, of course, carbon. It allows us to be much more robust than what we've seen in the market over the last decade or so. Because we can basically tell you this is a ton of carbon because these units with this serial number were used for this many hours in this part of the world. But operationally, it's also very interesting because it allows us to see this one's being used 14 hours a day. That's very interesting. Let's find out why. And invariably, we'll find out it's being used by some kind of street vendor for commercial purposes, which is very interesting because then we can start thinking about tailoring a fuel offering to them. You're using charcoal right now. How about you use these sustainable briquettes? So that's a very interesting one. And on the other side of the spectrum, you've also got it's only being used for a couple of hours on Sunday. Let's find out why that is. And there might be some kind of perceived product market misfit or the like. We do this in a number of countries. So we're in East Africa. Uganda is an important market for us. We're also in Southern Africa, in Lesotho, and in Southeast Asia, in Cambodia. Great. I'll yield the rest of my time for that.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Ruben. Set the tone very nicely there, short and sharp. Anastasia, you're next. So Anastasia is the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Regrow. She has a PhD in aerospace engineering from another kind of rival of mine, Sydney University, with a thesis on robust feature-based terrain-aided visual navigation and mapping.
You got it.
I got it. One of BBC's top 100 women, and various other accolades, including being an unreasonable fellow. Unreasonable's a thing. I'm not saying you're an unreasonable person.
I am.
So, yeah, tell us about Regrow.
Thank you so much, Cameron. And yeah, there is something that binds us. I, after my doctorate, held an associate position at Monash. So
Brilliant.
I was right there. Okay, well, I know Ruben did that thing, but there's no red dot right now. And I'm in an academic institution, so I will take my liberties with my notes to make sure I use my 5 minutes wisely. It's fantastic to be speaking to all of you, and I will absolutely violate what Cameron said is supposed to be happening right now, pitching. I actually want to go to what Vice Chancellor said, Irina, and tell you a story, connect on a human level. So how do I find myself here today? I grew up in Ukraine, in the south, and we grow a lot of crops there. So think about it as actually a Mediterranean climate, like California, like Italy, or you grow watermelons, peaches, sunflowers, and a lot of tomatoes. And the way my mom grew tomatoes and everything else that she touched, really, struck me as something that's not only very healthy, and of course it was taking all of my weekends because, I'm part of the family, so I'm supposed to be contributing to feeding myself, which made me more efficient academically, as you can see. But it also prompted me to think, well, how is the conventional agricultural field across the road looks so black and the soil is turned over all the time, and this looks like a forest, or like it's only 1 acre that Mom is playing with, but there's trees and tomatoes are growing under the shade of trees, and we're composting all the time, and we're to a point where we're taking from the city where we live in a small apartment all the food scraps and bringing it out to this little patch of land. And lo and behold, of course, I don't have any green thumbs like she does, so I went into engineering like Grandpa, so that I could scale decision support systems to actually help other people make better decisions like Mom does, but not on 1 acre, but hopefully on billions of arable acres. And that's how I ended up being a rocket scientist, and aerospace actually is not as hard as soil biogeochemistry. It turns out a lot harder. The passion that I started with that 16-year-old approach to scale what Mom saw and was doing actually turned out to now be called regenerative agriculture. And the mission on which I've set out Regrow and founded the company was to turn all acres into resilience, to transition them. And truly, we even picked regrow as a verb because it's an action verb for a company. Now I want to tell you a little bit about impact, because why am I standing here in this incredible school, invited by Mette and the team to tell you the story, because I want to tell you about the business model and the science that now is driving transformation and transition of millions of acres on our platform and visibility into billions of acres into agriculture food system. So this is how it works. First of all, I'll give you the numbers on the impact so you know why you're listening to me. First of all, Regrow is monitoring 1.5 billion acres of agricultural supply sheds, all paid for by food companies that want to build resilience in their supply shed. We are a B Corp, so everything we do turns into the investment into the supply chain. And the way it works is that from that visibility and the abatement potential that we model to transition the food systems, agricultural businesses and food businesses like Mars, Nestle, Kellogg, Cargill, Pepsi, Unilever, you name it, you pick it, they're investing into regenerative ag programs by truly paying the farmer based on the ecosystem service that we're able to estimate. And it starts with the tons of carbon equivalent because it's a bit more defined market, because we have voluntary carbon standards and corporates understand how to pay for it. Now there's CSRD and other directives that really coalesce us towards that impact. And now we've abated over 800,000 tons of carbon equivalent, and the corporate partners that we have paid farmers around $30 million for those tons in just the last 3 to 4 years since we've been doing this. I'll tell you all about the how in terms of remote sensing, generative AI, and biogeochemical modeling that underpins Regrow as a platform, but I thought I'd start teasing you with the business model, and then you'll come join me for lunch.
Very good. Anastasia showing there that she's given a TEDx talk before and she knows about the little red dot. This is great. So our next non-pitcher, Professor Jacquie McGlade, will probably be known to many of you, former executive director of the European Environment Agency and former chief scientist of UNEP. Jacquie, we know you're a phenomenon. There are loads of prizes here. I'm just going to read out a paper of yours, the title of it, I love doing this, that I really enjoyed. Elephants and Fire as Causes of Multiple Stable States in the Serengeti Woodlands. So there you go. The floor is yours to tell us about Downforce.
Thank you, Cameron. I did have a slide, and it's not that one, and it's coming. Here it is. No, just one back. The reason I put this up is because I want to very quickly take you on a global tour, because I want to start in New York, and I want to end up here. Why New York? In 2013, we had to decide, and I was the chief scientist at the time, for the environment pillar, for the SDGs, what was going to be the indicator for land degradation. And if you read the small print, it's actually soil organic matter, otherwise known in soil organic carbon, interchangeable. So why did we go for that? Well, because it's a kind of an indicator that when you measure it, it has meaning for a farmer, but it also is a target that member states can actually achieve and aim for. Because you can't just simply say land is degraded, you have to measure it in some way. The difficulty was, of course, back then, it was very difficult to measure, exactly as we've heard. So when I left the UN, I thought this has got to be one of the hardest problems, because soil is one of the largest sinks of carbon that we have on this planet. And unlike other things, once you get it in the soil, it keeps on going down and it will stay there. So we can have endless arguments about permanence, but I can tell you, once it's in the soil, it gets really down, deep and dirty. So how could we actually do this in a way that's meaningful for governments, which will make them act at speed, but at the same time, the very people who have to do the work and make the difference will get some kind of feedback that they're doing the right thing. And that's really why Downforce was created, to make every hectare count, to make the invisible visible, all those things that we've talked about, but to really help people understand how they can change behaviours and see the outcome, and maybe be paid for it, but certainly to get a certificate on the wall. So starting at the top, one of the things that we need to do is to not only finance, but to really think about that motivation. And one of the biggest motivations, I have to say, in companies is compliance, reporting, and making sure you're collecting the kinds of data that will initialize not only the P&L accounts, but actually how we're going to make business in the future. So one arm of Downforce has always been to focus on that kind of sweet spot of what can we say that is trusted, is robust, and repeatable. So we went for an ISO standard, a big industrial standard, and what do? We take a farm, we take a property, we can take 600,000 hectares, we can take 1 hectare, from a little farm in Kenya to a massive ranch in Australia. And what we've been able to do, we've built a digital twin, not a digital shadow, a digital twin, using all the data that is publicly and freely available, that I've spent sort of 20 years collecting with all the member states, so that we're able to literally monitor land 10 meters squared, like this stage, every 10 days, and tell you how much soil carbon is there. And with that, we can give you diagnostics. But more importantly, we can then report that towards an industrial standard, which means it stands up scrutiny. You can put it to a carbon position, let's say. Where are you in an insetting program? Where are you for an offsetting? If you really want to go that far and put your carbon up for sale, you can put it into a registry. What we find, though, which is very interesting, is the middle position. People actually just want to have, I'm not saying bragging rights, but if you're in a brand conversation, you want to say unequivocally, I am doing the right thing. I am storing carbon. Yes, I'm farming, but I'm actually storing carbon at the same time because I'm doing the right things. Not in a prescriptive way, but through a long, long list of things. So now let me come to the other side, which is the people who are actually doing the work. Many of you know I live in Kenya, and I work with many, many farmers at 1 hectare. But at the same time, Downforce is talking to communities, to cooperatives, and then to very large farmers all around the world. And what they really want to understand is what works where. And so instead of going for a sort of technological aggregative way, we say, we'll tell you locally that what you did last year, this is the outcome. We're agnostic, but this is actually what happened. You put biofertilizer in, this is what happened. So these diagnostics work literally by helping people understand how they can make impact. Once you have data like that, of course, it means that your outcomes are valuable and valued. So the final piece of the picture is, and this is sort of the thing that we've talked about a lot, but it will be what will move governments, will move people, and will move consumers. And it's the difference between true cost accounting, which is what, of course, Dasgupta talked about, making the invisible visible. We want true value accounting. We want to put value on top of just the pure cost. And that true value accounting is what Kenya and quite a few other countries around the world are really trying to do with nature-based solutions, so that we see that every action on the land, which Downforce is able to capture through the soil carbon, through the trees and so on, but really to say that what you do matters, and we can tell other people that what you have done has actually worked, or not worked in some cases. So it's about trusted, robust data, being able to sit, collect it once, use it many times, be believable, but be the thing that makes people want to change. Thank you.
Dare I say that was a truly valuable talk. Sorry, I just had to do it. And finally, before lunch, Cécile Girardin, Director of Nature-Based Insights, a spin-out from the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative that you just heard about from Professor Seddon. Cécile is not just a scientist, as you've heard and possibly seen. She's an artist as well. I've just picked out a little paper of yours too, I'm afraid, to share with him. I love the look of shock and dismay. But there's no reason to be dismayed. There's a beautiful paper called Understanding the Value and Limits of NBS to Climate Change and Other Global Challenges. It's an example of the academic work. Anyway, but you're not here to talk academically, so you can relax. Tell us about nature-based insights.
Okay. Well, first, thank you. Thank you for these presentations. Amazing. And I hope there's potential to collaborate here, because I feel like we're all looking at the same problem and tackling it from different angles. So I think I'll just start by saying that in a nutshell, we're looking at biodiversity, and that's the focus of our work. In general, you've heard throughout today that the evidence is clear that regenerating nature is a path to healthy social and ecological systems, and that there's growing evidence on the effectiveness of nature-based solutions in addressing societal challenges, in increasing resilience of landscape, in climate change adaptation, and in mitigation. So there's solid evidence on the concept that in general, complex landscape hosts more biodiversity than simple ones, and we all seem to be aiming for the same thing. We're aiming for complex landscapes where agricultural land, protected ecosystems, restored ecosystems, increased connectivity, all interact to create more resilient landscapes. And recognizing this now, I'm going back to the global level, recognizing this at the global level, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework on biodiversity are increasingly aligned. And as a result of this, it means that companies that, just as large companies, as many of you know because you're here, are required to report and act on their climate-related impacts, risks and opportunities, the same is happening for nature. And it's happening fast because companies realize this is coming, and the regulatory framework is developing very fast. So they're required to report and act on their nature-related impacts, risks, and opportunities. But then the scale of rate and the rate of change that's required for addressing biodiversity loss is enormous and unprecedented, and biodiversity is more complex to monitor than greenhouse gases. So that's where the complexity of the science involved to respond to this highlights large skill gaps within companies, and that's where we come in to help with the technical support, to help companies design nature solution or nature strategies that are rigorous, that are achievable, that have clear plans for implementation, etc., etc. So that's where we came in. So about 3 years ago, we founded Nature-Based Insights to translate our research into practice. And now we've grown into a team of scientists that are passionate about working on the latest science to guide organizations to set ambitious but achievable goals for nature. And what's most important to us, of course, is to turn these goals into long-term measurable action on the ground. So we're developing strong partnerships with implementation partners on the ground. We have strong partnerships with the companies we work with to help them push as far as they can beyond the reporting requirements into action on the ground. So we do all the technical stuff, like you said, we can talk about it at lunch. We've been designing a scientifically robust analytical framework that supports the planning, implementation, and monitoring of nature-based solutions at the landscape scale. And this framework provides in-depth multidimensional analysis of nature-related impacts, risks of climate and nature-related risks, and so forth. So I can talk about this in more detail over lunch. So at the core of our approach is this model, but it allows us to provide the tech support that's needed to plan for nature-based solutions that are socially just, net zero aligned, ecologically sound, and achievable. And this is just a quick overview of our process. I don't think I have much time to go on. But we look at data gathering, footprint and baseline analysis, and then use that information to go through rigorous stakeholder consultations and decide with local stakeholders what the best, most achievable, best nature-based solutions activities, be it protection, restoration, or better management of their working land, would be in those landscapes. Then we go through scenario modeling and help design a monitoring and evaluation strategy that then allows us to monitor progress against a baseline. So we're just providing this scientific rigor and the structure to the whole process, and letting local stakeholders guide us on what the actual solutions are, the local solutions are. And we've been working with quite a few clients and partners on this. Our favorite is Our most advanced project, our showcase project, is working with Reckitt on their G-Rex farms. And don't worry, condoms don't grow on trees, but we work on their rubber farms. And with them, we're at the stage where we're starting to implement transitioning to agroforestry in hundreds of rubber farms in the landscape they work in, but also working on protection and restoration of ecosystems within that landscape. I'll just stop there.
Fabulous.
I think
Thank you very much. So you've heard 4 brief overviews. You can dig into greater depth at lunch. Apparently there are what are called poseur tables. I didn't know this term until today. Trust me that none of these guys are posers, but the tables will be there and you can chat to them at lunch. I have to say, it's been fascinating hearing about where you are in the stages of your businesses, and it's been great listening to a morning's worth of food for thought before we have the food to eat. It's always nice for me to hear my colleagues. So thank you very much. That's the end of this little set, and I hand back to Netta. Thank you.